Welcome to the Journos. I'm Alison McConnell, joined by Hugh McDonald and Stephen McGowan. We'll be continuing the post-mortem following Dortmund. We'll be looking at Hearts and at Scotland, just a few of the topics up for discussion on today's show. But first things first, it's Celtic under the microscope. Stephen, you were working on Tuesday evening. What was your assessment of it?
It was excruciating. It was one of these games where it was clear from a very early stage that Celtic were just far too open. When they got an equaliser, you thought maybe they're giving themselves a chance, but okay, they get unlucky, but the ball spins up off Austin Trusty's toe. But I think at 3-1, you're thinking this could get messy because they've been in that movie before. It felt like an old story. And you're thinking at that point, maybe with a bit of hindsight, you're thinking maybe they really should be looking to change this at this point. And I think the big debate, the big discussion everybody's having now is about the tactics, about Brendan Rodgers. Could he have amended that to stop the score becoming so gruesome, because he'd been there before? They have history for this. I think over his 2 spells in charge, I think Brendan Rodgers Celtic now have lost 6 goals or more as often in the Champions League as they've won. So I just think there was a case really in a competition where goal difference could count for damage limitation, because anybody looking at that game when it got to 3-1 who thought Celtic were going to get back into it was kidding themselves.
The thing is, it got to 3-1 very quickly. You know, you're not talking about the game being deep into the game. Within 10-15 minutes, you're aware there are waves after waves of Dortmund's attack. An argument it could have been 4 or 5 by that point. Would you agree that?
Alison, at that point, I was sitting slightly towards the Celtic defensive end, part-wise, a really good seat, could see everything. And by that level, it wasn't just 3-1. It was 3-1 and it was DEFCON 3. There was alarm bells going off everywhere round about me. People were saying, this is not only just 3-1, this could be 5 already. I mean, there's a couple of narratives that Brendan Rodgers has propounded in the aftermath of this, is what the Celtic were unlucky, 1 goal's deflected, there's a penalty, soft penalty, They took every chance is the great mantra. No, they did not. If they had taken every chance, it would have been... There's cliches where people just say, this could be 10. It could have been 10. This could be anything. This could have been anything. There was a point towards the only hope in the second half was the way Celtic played, and I was sitting among Celtic fans. The only hope was people around me say, let's hope they chuck it. Let's hope they say, enough's enough. And in certain ways, they did chuck it. They took off Brandt, who was...
Well, Adeyemi's injury...
Andy's injury was always greeted to a standing ovation.
Without losing any kind of fluency.
Yeah, but, their level their intensity just dropped a wee bit. But even then, every time Dortmund got the ball in the second half, which was the opposite end from me, every time we got the ball, you said, they could score, they could score.
Toying with Celtic at points.
I think the big... That was just, people say... and they say quite rightly, footballers, because they've got to deal with immediate trauma. The only way to deal with that is you always hear them say it, right, it was a bad day at the office, we move on. And that's the way you do it. But this repetition of these bad days...
Yeah, but Kasper Schmeichel came into the mix zone afterwards and he said it was an isolated game. It was a one-off. Actually, Kasper, it wasn't. If you look back at results in Europe in recent seasons, it's becoming a repeated damaging pattern. Yeah. And I think it's quite understandable, and I've done it myself, of saying they should be more pragmatic, they should set up to be harder to beat, and I totally subscribe to that. 4-2-3-1 at 3-1 down, just try something to close down the space between midfield and defence when Dortmund players were streaking into those spaces at will. But so many of the goals came from individual errors and mistakes because the players panicked and blew up. And actually, that probably goes back to the pragmatism issue as well, because if you set up to be harder to beat, to be more in control of the game from the beginning, then you don't get to that point where players are going, oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was clear. I mean, obviously, what you're referencing is the 7-0 to Barcelona, the 7-1 against PSG, 6-0 against Atletico, now 7-1 against Dortmund. But we heard it from Ange Postecoglou too. I'm not going to compromise on my principles. This is the way I want my team to play. This is where we will learn in this environment. But there cannot be a more compelling case now for setting up differently, approaching games differently than being on the kind of result that Celtic were on Tuesday night. Do you anticipate the same kind of setup now when Celtic play Atalanta, or do you think that there might be a compromise in terms of we have to be difficult to beat rather than we have to try and go and play this open, expansive football and impose our own style on a team that are very capable in the Champions League?
It's got awkward now, hasn't it? Because you have journalist after journalist and fan after fan telling Brendan Rodgers, who is an elite manager, how to do his job. Now, if I'm Brendan Rodgers, I'm thinking, is that right? You know, and you know, he needs no lessons from me or Hugh or you, Alison, or anybody on how to be a football manager. The question is just how stubborn does he want to be? Funny enough, after the Slovan Bratislava game, when Celtic won 5-1, and this shows how fickle it all is, I wrote a piece saying that Brendan Rodgers had finally slain the ghost of Ange Postecoglou. You know, he had, people would stop talking about Big Ange and, you know, and holding it against Brendan for not having an Aussie accent and a beard. But here we are now, and actually you're looking and thinking, you know what, maybe there's not that much difference between Ange Postecoglou and Brendan Rodgers at all. Because they both have this stubborn adherence to the way they want to play football, to their philosophy, and they seem deeply resistant to change. But for me personally, it should change before Atalanta, because actually Atalanta, if anything, looking at the two games, was always the one I thought was going to be the most messy for Celtic. And if it gets more messy than 7-1, that's pretty messy.
That's the thing. I mean, Stephen raises an interesting point there about Brendan and just what was said in the post-match special conferences. Do you think there'll be a change?
I think you would think automatically there'd be a change. You think your rational mind says there'll be a change, but then your rational mind goes back. It's always the lessons from history. Was there a change after they lost the first one 7 odd, or the second one 7 odd, or the third one 6 odd, or the next one 7 odd? I mean, you say, well, no, there wasn't. So why, if you were a rational human being trying to predict future behaviour on with the evidence of past behaviour, which is usually the way that we do predict events, we say to people, he'll do that or she'll do that, because that's what they always do.
Well, you're entitled to think that the players are better at his disposal now. I mean, they said before the first game, he feels more ready for the Champions League than previously. You look at the signing of Arne Engels, they spent a bit more money. You look at the signing of Adam Ida, they spent more money than any Scottish club has spent in a transfer window. So you're entitled to think things could be better this time. The trouble is, we've just discovered actually the other night that they might not be. The problem is Celtic are caught in a no man's land when it comes to the Champions League, aren't they? The money they get for the Champions League makes them too good for the opposition in Scotland, but it's not enough to compete seriously with the big teams in the Champions League. They're now in this kind of holding pattern where they can't, you know, they're neither here nor there. Clearly they haven't signed players good enough to live with the Borussia Dortmunds of this world. And that's the bigger concern. And Cameron Carter-Vickers was a big loss. Would he have made such a difference there? I'm not sure he would.
The criticism, of course, is that you know there's this level in a domestic sense, and then there's a level in a Champions League sense. But is it fair to say that Celtic, with what they've got, should be more competitive?
It should have been more competitive the other night, and I'll tell you why it should be more competitive the other night. I'm, as you know, a Dortmund fan, and I watched them closely. I've been there. I mean, they would every time they would be live on television, I would watch Dortmund. I would always look for the results. I'd get their highlights. I would read about them. So I know a fair bit about them. This is not a good Dortmund side. And people go, but they got to the Champions League final last year. This team didn't. They lost players over the summer. And the team that got to Champions League final, perversely, weren't a great team anyway. Things worked for them. It worked for them. They were a bit lucky against PSG, very lucky against Atletico Madrid. But what they are is a bona fide Champions League team. And if you think I'm talking them down, have a look at the betting for them to win this tournament. You'll get 50-1 for them to win this. So they're not a team that's expected to win the Champions League this season by any manner of means. They've just come off a 5-1 defeat to Stuttgart. 5-1 to Stuttgart. The sort of powerhouse in the midfield, Sabitzer, has fallen out with the manager Sahin. There's rumours that there's another 2 players in the team that have fallen out badly with him as well. Some of the others are apparently not convinced about this 40-year-old young manager anyway. So you're coming into that, and I can see where Brendan Rodgers is coming into that. like on the back of domestic dominance, a good pre-season with all the caveats, beating Chelsea, Man City, and window, all the caveats around. I can say, do you know what? I think we've got a chance here.
That's the problem. Maybe a bit of underestimating them.
And I could see that, and I think it's quite reasonable, and I think it's quite a good thing for a manager to be, if anything, overly optimistic and transmit to them. Because the big problem I've got was it was an hour later their time. The big problem I had was at 9:10 in the Westfalen Stadium on the Ruhr. I'm looking at something and saying, you have to change this. It was the kind of thing like the Johnny doing your primary school team would say, this is untenable. I mean, it's not like just one wee two things have been wrong, there's been wee fluky. We are just getting done here, done. We have to change something. We have to go to a flat back four. The fullback can't go on. Your out ball's going up the wing. We've got to sit Engels and McGregor, whatever.
4-2-3-1 or something, just at 3-1. Just close that gap between midfield and defence, because they were getting turned so easily. Every time you looked up at 3 or 4 Dortmund players at pace, streaming into this great big gaping area between the defence and midfield.
What are the reasons for not changing it? Does it come down to obstinacy?
I think it does. And I think it comes down to the fact where he's saying, no, this thing, and you see it through all levels of football. I go to all levels of football, and you'll see it in the West of Scotland, Division 4. There's two things. There's an area of coaches who say, this is just the way we play. So you'll see guys in tatty fields in Fife, right, playing the ball out from the back and telling you that it's because 80% of the time that you lose the ball, according to XG and Opta, such and such. You say, no, you're playing a bog in Fife, hit the ball long to your 6
I'm feeling quite offended on Fife's behalf here, I have to say. The implication that every pitch is a tatty field in Fife is harsh.
Some of them are plastic.
Yeah, okay.
The point I'm making is there's this thing that this is the proper way to play football. This is the way we should play. And if you've got a style, you should stick to it, and you've got to tell the players, you go, yeah, but sometimes plans disintegrate on contact with reality, and that's the thing. And the second one is, people were saying, when I was watching this, why were the guys on the pitch not saying, this isn't what, change it? The whole culture now, the old days, even the Lisbon Lions would tell you that there was things going on in the park. They would say, this is not working. We'll have to pull somebody back into midfield. They wouldn't go look to Steen, the greatest manager, certainly the greatest Celtic manager of all time, to change it further. They would work it out. That doesn't happen now.
It was interesting though, because in the mix zone afterwards, Callum McGregor spoke, and he did actually say, maybe we need to have a look at this now. You know, and I thought that was interesting, because Callum McGregor and Brendan Rodgers tend to sing for the same hymn sheet most of the time. Callum McGregor is an exceptional talker, a good captain. You know, I think there's an argument that he's like Celtic as a team. In Scotland, he's exceptional when he steps up to that level. Not quite at it at Champions League level. And there's no great shame in that, just the way it is. But he said in the mix zone afterward, he said, yeah, maybe we need to look at whether we're quite so as attacking as we are in that game the other night there.
It is interesting. So much of the focus obviously goes to the manager and tactics and how they're lined up. But do the players need to take a bit of accountability too? If you look at the cheapness of some of the goals, the cheapness was
absolutely. I mean, you look at every goal, Alison. You look at the third goal. I think Maeda gives the ball away, possession at the edge of his own box. Bang. 2 penalties he gave away for slack fouls. Trusty was a bit unfortunate with the one that spun up off his toe, but equally was a bit slow getting to block him in the first place, so the guys letting him quick. Look at goal number 6, where Scales is turned inside out. After Alistair Johnson gives the ball away from his own right-back position. Goal number 7, again, I think it's Trusty, just a poor clearance, just goes straight to the substitute, bang. But so much of that, as I say, came from the lack of a solid foundation in the first place, I think. The players just blew up and lost it. The way you do when you're losing 4, 5, 6 goals. Lack of composure, lack of calm. They just stopped doing the basics. They lost their shape. And again, I think if there's a more solid structure that gives them a basis in the game and just makes them a bit more hard to beat. I mean, we've seen Celtic managers in the past who I think had players less than the players in the team just now. Think back to Barry Robson, Paul Hartley playing for Celtic in the Champions League under Gordon Strachan. Thinking back to Jiri Jarosik playing for Celtic in the Champions League. Not magnificent Celtic players, good Celtic players, but not superstars. But they were forged in a shape which made them difficult to beat.
Yeah.
And nobody cares that Celtic only had 20% possession against Barcelona in 2012. All they cared about was that they won the game, because that is the bottom line. It's not about philosophy. It's not about the Celtic DNA of playing football the Celtic way. The fans are fed up of this and they just want to compete.
And Strachan got into Strachan, whose managerial record, quite frankly, improves when you get Celtic, and every year that passes, you start thinking what he inherited. You know, there's a great line, you know, that he went from Chris Sutton to Chris Killen. You know, and if you look at what Strachan did with a back,
brought the wage down hugely,
didn't he? And a back four gets to the quarterfinals, or the last 16 of the Champions League, plays AC Milan over 3 hours, a really good AC Milan team, and loses 1 goal in 3 hours and gets knocked out. Well, back four, I think, would be Telfer, McManus, Caldwell, and Naylor. Now, listen, I've got nothing.
Side with Kaka,
and Zaga.
Extra time goal, was it not?
Yeah. So, and you're looking at that and you're saying, listen, all of them, decent players, I would never disrespect them. But you're not talking about, you wouldn't have thought, you're certainly not talking about elite Champions League players. No. You're the best to talk about Champions League group stage players. I think one of the problems with the team is, if you're asking players to do what they can do, you always got a chance. We know it in our own lives. If we're asked to do it, under the greatest stress, if you say to Stephen, for example, or myself or anybody, you've got to do a Champions League report with a last-minute winner in Lisbon, and we want 1,500 words immediately. That is stressful. But we do it because we know we can do it. This is what we do. But if they ask you to say, if they said you would not say, bin the 1,500 thing, we want you to do something on the neurological implications of excess alcohol take. And you go, what? I don't know how to... So
I think I'd be okay with that, to be fair. I mean, you might struggle. I mean, I'd find that fine, but I mean...
This belaboured point I'm making is, ask players to do what they can do, because under stress, your weakest point fractures. So if you're saying to players who are not the rondo, magnificent players that can play passes and take passes under pressure, this is not what they do for in their career. A Sheffield United centre half, a ex-Kilmarnock full back, whatever, right? If you're saying to them, you've got to perform, you've got to do that for 90 minutes, every second, every touch, and they get a couple wrong quickly.
Well, they can't. To be fair, they've been doing it pretty well so far this season. It's just when you're asking them to do it, when you're asking them to do it against players, absolute world-class players that Borussia Dortmund have, that is the difference. And you know what? There's not much sympathy for Celtic, or you think back to Rangers losing to Liverpool 7-1 and what have. There's not much sympathy from domestic rivals. No. You know what Scotland's like? Rivalries are tough as teak. People love it when their rivals get pumped. Let's be honest here.
And also the fact that Celtic lord it over
Absolutely, that's the point I was going to make. Yeah, they will get no sympathy because they can't complain about financial gulfs when they have such a vast financial gulf over St Johnstone and the rest. It's like the shoe going in their foot. People like to see that. However, for me, there's a European Super League unofficially in operation already. You've got the clubs from the big five nations who are clearly in a completely different ballpark to Slovan Bratislava and to Young Boys of Bern, to Celtic and Dinamo Zagreb. And you know what? I'm just getting to the point now where I'm thinking, see if there's a European Super League, bring it on, make it happen, give it promotion and relegation, and if Celtic and Rangers go into League 3 or whatever, that's fine. But let's stop faffing about with us pretending that in some shape or form, clubs who are in small leagues like Scotland or Croatia or Slovakia could somehow compete with clubs of, these vast resources who can call in the very best players in the planet.
Yeah.
I think it's time to make it official.
Is there a psychological element, do you think, for Celtic going on these away games, just given the fact that there's a ghost of how many?
I mean, we can just talk about personally. If bad things happen to you in certain situations, you're going to be apprehensive going into certain situations. It's a very human. This is why I think even in many ways the psychological, not even goal difference, it could certainly come into the equation in this league system. Even psychologically at 3-1 the other day, there's a case for protecting your players. There's a case for saying to them, listen, right, we're just going to shut up shop here, even for 15 minutes. We're just going to sober up for 15 minutes. We're going to play the ball long to Maida, let them chase it. We're going to sit behind the ball. Callum, I don't want to see you ahead of the ball at any time whatsoever, and I don't want to see Engels in front of the ball at any time whatsoever. There's a case for and that's not something like cowardice or throwing away your principles. Unai Emery, who's got very strong claims to be, I think, very strong claims to be one of the best managers operating in the world at this moment, particularly given the resources at his disposal. And we know he's got huge resources, but we're talking about in comparison to Barcelona, Real Madrid, Liverpool, Manchester United, Man City. Very interesting what he did with Munich. Everybody
parked the bus.
Parked the bus.
And then
and won the game. And everybody in Aston Villa, there was more case, surely, for Aston Villa to say, we can go toe-to-toe with Bayern Munich. I mean, that's not in their
You know what I was thinking about, Hugh, as well, was I was thinking back to Scotland, Switzerland.
Yep.
If you remember, and Callum McGregor referred to this the other night as well, actually. Sometimes in a game, and that was one of them, Scotland scored early, Switzerland equalised through Shaqiri, was it? A cracking goal. And Switzerland looked like they were going to run over the top of Scotland for 5-10 minutes. And Callum McGregor and Billy Gilmour just got the ball and they passed it side to side and they took the sting out of the game. They just that period before half time stabilised the whole thing, took the sting out of it and just calmed things down, allowed them to regroup and get back in the dressing room with a fighting chance. That is imperative at times, and that's what we're saying about players sometimes taking the initiative and taking the power. I genuinely think you're at a point now where Celtic fans, if they lost 3-1 the other night, would have been okay with that.
Aye.
It would have represented progress. And as you say, Hugh, losing the game in itself doesn't make a big difference to the bigger picture. I think when we looked at this draw, I think it was always a feeling if Celtic won their home games and could maybe nick something in Zagreb, they could go to the playoffs. They probably still can. The difference is that when you lose 7 goals, the narrative changes. Because people have now gone from thinking, they can beat Club Brugge, they can beat Young Boys, to thinking
the optimism that surrounds
maybe they can't beat anybody. It just changes the optimism in the narrative.
It brings an edge to everything.
It does.
And it also brings, obviously, the team very, very firmly down to earth on the back of what was a flying start to the campaign and the 5-1 win over Bratislava and all the rest of it. But would you be tempted to go with Adam Ida up front against Atalanta?
Yeah, I would. And I would. I mean, again, we've always got to put the caveat, and Stephen Quayle says, there's no doubt that Rodgers, and I've got my differences and I've got my, what's the words about it? I've got my reservations about him in many ways, but one reservation I don't have about him, this is an elite man, this is, that quote, that Grinclage, this is a guy who knows coaching, he's a good coach. We see how he makes players better, etc. Is he a great manager in that? Does he just say to some, this is a situation I now have to manage, rather than this is a coaching philosophy that I've got to espouse and put out to my players? Do I have to manage things now? Past evidence suggests that he tends to just do the same thing over and over again. But if you were talking about going to Atalanta, he's already hinted that Atalanta is a different game, he says. Well, yeah. And they go man-to-man, which is what Atalanta do. Atalanta tend to, they don't tend to defend in any way zonally. They don't have to have a rigid setup. They actually do go man-for-man with the opposition. You saw it most kind of like startly, the way they did a number in Leverkusen in the European final. They just did a number on them because Leverkusen couldn't handle this man-to-man press, this man-to-man pressure that Atalanta had put on. If Atalanta do that to Celtic, and he's saying, well, we'll be going man-to-man with them, this is a team that did that and smashed the Bundesliga champions, smashed them.
Because that's the
I don't know if you
thing.
can do
I
that.
mean, the optics around one hammering are bad enough, and now having to go and rally a team and pick them up and keep them. But if you do it
there might be, pragmatism might not change anything. You know, pragmatic teams lose football games. You know, you might only be indulging, as we say, in damage limitation, but until you try, you don't know. And it's calling out for that now.
Yeah, and I think even just a willingness to be seen to do something else, a willingness to say
because
it hasn't worked, so we have to learn.
In recent weeks, this is a very fragile situation, because in recent weeks, there was this kind of swingometer going about online where it went from people who couldn't say Brendan Rodgers' name without phoning Rent-A-Kill. You know, it went from there to Rodgers to Brendan. You know, and now they're singing the Brendan song again. You know, he had completely kind of rehabilitated himself in the eyes of the Celtic supporters after the events of February 2019. That can swing again quite quickly. The Champions League can be a very dangerous place for a Scottish football manager. Yep. We saw that with Giovanni van Bronckhorst. I think we saw Ange Postecoglou probably saw himself. If he did another Champions League campaign, that could damage his stock. So it really can be quite hazardous to a manager's chances. I think we saw Celtic improve as a team when they got the Champions League out of the way last season, because it was just one done after another, actually.
But it doesn't get any, so you've got Atalanta away, and then it's Leipzig at home.
It's a real awful triumvirate of fixtures.
Yeah.
Just stuck in the middle.
I watched Leipzig last night, you know, and I thought, very unlucky.
You've got the situation which again takes you back to how Bratislava, what an important result Bratislava was like. Imagine if they'd struggled against Bratislava and just drawn one each or something like that. This result, and we can all look back.
They didn't, to be fair. They didn't.
That's what I'm saying. They played so well. They've got that in the bank, and they got 3 solid, magnificent points, and that is such an important result. Because Brendan Rodgers, I mean, people will say, "Oh, take one game at a time." Of course, an elite manager's is going to look at his next 3 fixtures: away to Dortmund, away to Atalanta, and then Leipzig. They're the 3 biggies, because you hope that Birmingham in January or whatever it is, Aston Villa, is in irrelevance. That's what you hope. Might be an irrelevance for both clubs. So that's what you hope. And if you hope that, these three are the ones that you just really want to get out the road. And you want to get them out the road with as little dunce as possible. I mean, I think I was with the Celtic support. I mean, I was there over as a punter in the town for, full 2 days before kick-off. And this idea that Celtic supporters were going over there saying we can take Dortmund and we'll beat them wasn't my experience. Everybody generally that I was saying, we'll take 3-1 defeat.
They would have taken that. There would have been an acceptance of that. It would have been okay.
But this can be, these next couple of fixtures could be very wounding to any aspirations of going and making the playoffs.
I actually think, in many ways, if you look to them and dispassionately, and even if you looked at them at the beginning of the thing, if you said, see if we get no points out of 9 in these 3, which is always a possibility, there's still hope of progress. Yeah. It wouldn't be catastrophic in terms of actual.
In terms of the structure of the new format.
Other, psychologically, emotionally, narratives that we talk about in journalism now. This was always going to be the 3. I mean, the most optimistic Celtic fans I spoke to, and most optimistic journalists that we spoke to, was that if Celtic get one, this was a great line, wasn't it? I would say if they get 1 point out of the next 2, and then they've got Leipzig at home having got 4 points, what an amazing start that would be.
But when people were saying it was a positive draw, they weren't talking about Borussia Dortmund and Atalanta. No. Probably not even RB Leipzig. You look at the young boys. You look at those other games, Dinamo Zagreb away, which is one you'd hope you can maybe try and nick a point. So it's going to be 9 or 10 points, and that's going to be the maximum I think Celtic can realistically hope to take. So nothing has changed other than the perception that actually they're in a very good place because they lost 7 goals. That's why it's looking costly.
How would you be tempted to set up against Atalanta?
I don't get paid £2 million a year. That's not my job. No, I mean, you know what? I do remember Brendan Rodgers playing 4-2-3-1 in his first phase around. Yeah. He was quite married to it, actually. But, you know, you look at... The trouble is that the squad has been assembled so doggedly in terms of the 4-3-3. And you're looking and thinking Celtic could badly do with a big physical number 6. How they could use a Victor Wanyama type. And I think people were kind of hoping that Engels might be a bit of that, but actually it doesn't look like he's going to be used that way, and necessarily he's got that in his locker. He's a very good player, but it doesn't look like the big number 6 I think they've been trying out for. So I personally... you know, you're looking, because obviously Alison Johnson went off injured the other night there, so you're going to see how he is. I think he's pulled out the Canada squad. Greg Taylor had a bit of a knock. He came off at half time, so looked at the fullback, so you don't know how that's going to pan out. Cameron Carter-Vickers, not entirely clear how his toe is, so there's a lot of question marks. So we're looking probably at Bernardo, who can do the dirty stuff in there, and maybe McGregor sitting in, and then Engels or Hatate is like a number 10, probably Engels. You know, Kuhn or Forrest, and then your Maeda on the left, and I would play Adamida, because I think Adamida just gives you the physicality and the potential to hold the ball up. You know, we were talking about doing the George Samaras role, of just being the big guy up front who can just take the ball into the corners, hold it up, bring others into the play, because Kyogo is a superb footballer, but the other night you would have been as well playing. The game passed him by.
Kyogo the other night would have been absolutely lethal. On the same night, he would have been absolutely lethal if he was wearing a yellow shirt. Absolutely. He'd have the night of his life. He was playing with a green and white shirt. And see, it goes back to this thing. Sometimes we talk about coaches, of course they know so much more about it than us. But sometimes, like all people, they're wedded to their ideas. And some people are wedded to this idea, I know better than anybody else. And that's what gets them to the top. But sometimes it really is quite a simple game. Sometimes you've got to say, how do we get out of this predicament? And how we get out of this predicament is not passing the ball across the 18-yard line or making 20-yard passes into the morass of midfield from a right-back position. Sometimes it's taking the ball on the outside of your foot and hitting it 30, 40 yards up the line to your winger who's lightning. And who
to be fair, they did try that. That was the main kind of out-ball tactic in the first half at least, and then it all just kind of fell to bits. I mean, there was a couple of times it looked. I mean, Borussia Dortmund have obviously been rotating a right back quite a lot, haven't they? Sully, I think, was expected to play, and he didn't. But you know,
Maeda was getting.
He was getting some joy.
The other thing was, and the other one is, sometimes you just got to hit the ball to a centre forward. Sometimes you just got. Sometimes even the best teams in the world have to hit the ball to a centre forward. And you can't do that with Kyogo. You just can't. That's just not his game.
On to more domestic matters. Hearts have said this morning that their new manager is unlikely to be Scottish, that they're going to use this Tony Bloom's Jamestown analytics tool. What's your thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, that was clear from the start. It was quite amusing when they sacked Stephen Naismith and people were talking about, you know, the old candidates list that you see, you know, let's get John McGlynn in, or let's get in, you know, bring Craig Levine back. No, saying that obviously, but no, I mean
Neil Warnock to the end of the season.
But you know, sometimes there's a real lack of imagination in these processes, and it does drive fans to distraction. That's not an accusation you could level at Hearts here, and I say that to their credit. Tony Bloom is this company, Jamestown Analytics. It was quite clear from the start. Remember writing the story at the start, they were going to pursue that. Because Jamestown Analytics build themselves as one of the best exponents in the world of compiling data on players and coaches and finding the best people. Now, obviously, Brighton have got themselves a 31-year-old coach who looks a real deal, you know. He took from Sampaoli, and, you know. So I think Hearts are going to try and get down that road. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be imaginative. It's going to be different. I think the bigger thing for Hearts, as well as the head coach, is can they make this agreement with Jamestown Analytics work so that they can find a £3 million or £4 million sell on every single year? That could be a game changer. If they can develop this player trading model, the fashionable phrase now, which can find them a Bojan Majowski a year effectively, that really can be a big game changer.
It would also open the door every year to European football.
But that's the real crucial thing about the Bloom kind of way forward. Bloom made billions and continues to do so because he spots gaps. He spots gaps between what is realistically about to happen and the chances that other people think that is going to happen. They call it gambling. He would call it smart investment. He looks at that. That price does not actually reflect the likelihood. And sometimes you're not talking about huge odds, you're just talking about that little gap in the middle, and it's made him billions. So he's analyst-based. The interesting thing about, and we see it already from the manager they've got down there, the St. Pauli manager, who did really well with them, took them up from Bully 2 to Bully 1, playing good football as well, or playing an attractive brand, certainly playing winning football, is that the next coach, what's happening in Scotland finally, in some areas, is the idea of football managers gone. What they're going to have is coaches.
Head coach.
And the coach, and you know, you can see sometimes the rhetoric and the writing about it. The manager's got to choose the players. That's not happening now. It's taken as a red now. The manager's got nothing to do with choosing the players. Yeah. The manager can say in a group meeting, I need a left-sided central defender and I need a holding midfielder. That basically is now the level of his innovation. Yeah. He doesn't have a veto. He doesn't have a recommendation. And whoever manager will be brought into Hearts eventually, I'm not saying that will change as dramatically as that quickly, but that's what you're there to coach the players.
Well, I saw the interviews being conducted not only by Andrew McKinley, Chief Executive, but by Graham Jones, who's obviously the sporting director who's come from the Scottish FA. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I had that conversation, you probably did as well, also with Martin O'Neill last week, who's just taken over as the chairman of the LMA in England. And I said to him, well, how would you cope with management now? How would you cope with the Celtic transfer model as it is now? And in Martin's way, kind of dodged around, managed to dodge a question. But he did make...
minutes later.
He did make the interesting point that management now has fundamentally changed, just for the reasons you said. You know, a manager, the clubs are now going towards young coaches with no real power or clout or autonomy. They are told who they're going to get, they're told who they're going to sign, they're effectively told what the club's structure is. And you know what? I don't really have an issue with that, because you must have a plan. Everything evolves, everything changes, every dog has its day. And I think if Hearts are trying something new and innovative, and it's like anything, if it works, it's genius. If he turns out to be the next Dean Caffo, not so much.
Yeah.
Because if you're running a business, and football clubs have to be run as a business, and you can see in England slowly they've grasped this, and there's business precepts of it. You must have a long-term strategy. You'll have these guys, if you talk to Bloomer Embry or talk to the Fenway Group, etc., they're not going to, we're going to rely on some genius to get 4 world-class players, and then we'll win the Champions League and everybody lives very happily. They say, no, we're going to get the best coach we can, but we know that this coach is either going to be sacked by us or is going to leave.
Well, you know,
it's either a success or a failure.
And sometimes it's in the middle between it. It's a Clarke who is a success, but has to go anyway because he's burnt out. So what you're saying is it's not like the old days where you could say, build a dynasty on Alec Ferguson, build a dynasty on whoever. You're saying this guy's going to go, and when he goes, what's going to
your
happen?
sporting director should be a board appointment, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He should be the guy who they bring in to represent, act as a link between the coach and the team. They identify the playing style, the identity. I mean, I think Celtic and Rangers should have spoken. I think Celtic should have a sporting director appointed to say, right, this is our DNA, this is how we want to play football. You find a head coach, and the head coach is a subcontractor who is there to carry out the remit of delivering this identity, this philosophy and what have you and so on. All right, after everything was said, we should make clear there should be a bit of flexibility in that philosophy from time to time. But
effectively the conduit between what the club wants and
this is again where it hits reality. For example, at Celtic, where there's, at the moment there's no sporting director, no director of football, no real functioning recruitment department. If everyone's down to manager, and then you're saying to a manager, which you're saying to him, right, Brendan Rodgers, not only will we bring in a sporting director who will be over you, no matter how we couch this in the nicest possible terms, he'll be the one that dictates what goes on in this club for the next 15, 20 years. And B, you will have no veto over who we bring in. We'll ask for your opinions on the players that we're bringing in, but you will have no veto.
Well, actually, funny, Martin said that, because Martin said, you know, and I think this goes back to the point, you can only do it. You can only bring in a head coach who knows the game from the beginning.
Yes.
You can't change it mid.
Also, I think you probably need your head coach, your director of football, to appoint your manager, because
absolutely.
I think you can't have the
what you've
the
got
cart
a lot of
before the
times,
horse.
exactly, because what you've got a lot of time, extant. You imagine Celtic, we can talk openly about Celtic. If Celtic said, sitting down in a board meeting now and say, we've got to bring them in a sporting direction of the kind that is now becoming powerful, it's now become the template for modern clubs. And we've got to go and tell Brendan Rodgers, the appointee of the major shareholder, that from now that we're going to appoint somebody basically over his head. It's a huge political and organisational problem they've got there.
Yeah, you could have a real civil unrest.
Oh,
I
you
think,
could.
if you don't do-
It
you
would
have
be
to manage
disastrous.
it.
To get to the Hearts thing again, sorry, Alison, but I mean, the interesting thing is, I remember Chris Boyd did something in Sky Sports where he said, if you're Celtic and Rangers, you should be worried about this. Actually, I think Rangers should be more worried about it, because if you look at it, Celtic are well ahead with the player trading situation. Rangers, as we sit here at the moment, don't really have a strategy plotted out yet, because, they clearly need to get their structure sorted out with a new chief executive, the sporting director situation and what have you. Despite all the talk at AGMs from John Bennett and so on, they didn't really enact it. They still don't have a player trading model. And you have financial sustainability, which is going to come in, which is only going to strengthen Celtic's advantage, because teams will only be able to spend 70% of their turnover plus the 3-year average of their transfer model. So Rangers have a bit of a problem, and Hearts have a bit of an opportunity here.
It's a great opportunity for Hearts, and I think it's, and you're so right about the Majowski's thing. One of I think it applied to Engels, for example, one of the great recruitment strategies, if you're Celtic, is to bring out a video and give it to the agent of Engels or whoever else, Kuhn or whoever else, and say, this is what we do. And the video has Champions League nights at Celtic Park.
Maybe not that one the other night.
Well, it's ones at Celtic Park, even some of the ones not at Celtic Park.
Video nasties.
What has Van Dijk, Christie,
Heroes their
Ajer,
progression.
Edward, Dombele, this is
A well-trodden pathway.
You come here, not only will you be looked at by Premier clubs, but we're eager. We'll facilitate you going. Now, Hearts at a lower level have got the ability to go to players who think maybe not quite Premier League, but think, do you know what? I'm playing in Eastern Europe, or I'm playing Bully 2, or I'm playing lower league in France. But I think I could play Championship in England, or I think I could play in European competition. And they can say, we can give you 18,000 people in your home stadium, a competitive wage, and a pathway, because we're owned or heavily influenced by English Premier League analytics linked to an English Premier League club. I think it's really attractive for some players.
Immediately on the park, though, they need something quickly.
They certainly do. I think what they need more than anything is for that goal from Warren Shanklin the other week to start something, to start a fire.
Catalyst.
I mean, for me, it kind of is that simple, really. If you look last season, Warren Shanklin was banging them in from all angles, particularly after Christmas. Warren Shanklin doesn't score, Hearts don't win games. Now, there was a lot of discontent about Stephen Naismith. You go back to this old debate, should you ever appoint rookie managers? If you look at Barry Robson, you look at Stephen Naismith, then you're probably saying no. So that was clearly a factor. But for me, the biggest factor is just the lack of goals and the lack of Warren Shanklin goals in particular. I think Warren Shanklin was probably badly advised. It doesn't look like there were any offers for Warren Shanklin, despite all the kind of speculation and all the advice. I think it would have been better all round for all parties. I think Warren Shanklin found his level last season, and maybe above his level last season, but there's somewhere in the middle there. I think if he just signed for 10 grand a week, extended his contract, he might have had a clause in there. I think it would have been better for all parties. It looks now like he might leave in the end of a very unsatisfactory season. I just hope he can get his act together, and I hope he can do something to get Hearts up that league. There's just this curious situation where are Hearts and Aberdeen ever good at the same time?
I know.
Does it ever happen?
I know.
But I think we spoke about it last week. You take a goal scorer or you take the goals out of a team and all of a sudden you're in free fall.
It's usually, I just call it the Motherwell factor because it's the easiest one to use as an example of this. You know, if Motherwell are doing well, it's because they've got Higdon, Tony Watt or Van Veen,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
You know, and if they're not doing well, it's because they've not. I mean, I think to go into there's a lot of stuff and froth and quite good analytics about the relative performances of, say, Aberdeen and Hearts this year. And apparently there's very, you know, according to analytics experts, there's very little disparity between Aberdeen and Hearts.
So, right, yeah.
Yeah, but of course, if you look at the league table, it would tell you different. And one of the things is that Hearts just, if you take 30 goals, season goals from a Hearts, that's a huge. And I know we're not 30 goals into the season, but if you're taking it pro rata,
Yeah.
I mean, if you can imagine in a lot of tight games this season, if you got the odd Shanklin goal, I think I'm right in saying the Hearts haven't been pumped this season, you know.
No. I just thought it was weird because you've looked at the first game of the season when they drew 0-0 with Rangers. And after that game, you're thinking, my God, they've signed really well this summer. Anthony Taylor looked like a superstar.
Aye.
You know, Jan Danda, who I like as a player anyway. You know, Blair Spittle, so on. You know, and you're thinking they've signed really well. And after that 0-0 game, you're thinking this looks good for Hearts. I think, you know, credit where credit's due. And then since then, Taylor fell off a cliff. He's injured now, obviously. You know, and so on and so on. So, you know, you are only as good as the players you sign, effectively. And they probably haven't signed as well. And Shanklin did the season of his life last season. Probably couldn't sustain that, let's be honest. But they just need him to find a middle ground. And I think when he scored that goal, that equaliser in the 96th minute last week, there was a look of maybe kind of self-reproach that it was like about blinking time.
Yeah.
And I just hope he uses that to lift up.
An element of relief that comes with it.
Oh,
as well when you
absolutely.
end it.
I think, you know what, football is a mental game, isn't it? I mean that in the sense of psychological.
I mean, we're not going to get the violin out, but it's a tough time for players as well. I mean, they're human beings as well, and if they're in a situation of hearing lots of noise about, you know, where they should be, where they could be, he's of an age where this contract situation now is a telling one. I mean, you know, and I think that's a really good point with Stephen. If they sat down, taken a breath, and said, right, listen, kill the speculation right away by saying we'll take $500,000 a year for Hearts, which would have been huge. I mean, but I think Hearts might have bitten on that and said, right, but the buyout clause is X million and let's go on with it. It probably would have been, not probably, I think certainly would be the benefit of player and club.
Would you give Aberdeen third just now, Stephen?
I would, yeah. Unfortunately, Papa Gay getting that 14 weeks is out injured for. I mean, that I think to the credit of Jimmy Tellene, as well as signing reasonably well, he's improved the players who are there. You know, you look...
It's a measure of a coach, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I spoke to an Aberdeen fan the other day, said, he's taken 10 years off Shinnie.
Yep.
Young Jack McKenzie, who's really beginning to look at the left back they hoped he might be. They were hemorrhaging goals last season. They've kind of stopped doing that for now anyway. Big guy Nielsen they brought in midfielder who's kind of, I think he's 32, 33, but looks like a potential player of the season for them. And of course, they've got brought in Kevin Nisbet, who has a point to prove. And he's going to have to step up now, of course, because of the injury to Big Papa. But it just looks like Jimmy Tellene. Now, they've got a critical period coming up now because if we're being honest about it, Aberdeen did have quite a favourable start to the season. I think they would acknowledge that themselves. They had a disproportionately high number of games at Pittodrie. They were playing teams that were in the bottom six last season. There were a few Premier Sports Cup games in there, last weekend Spartans. Now, between now and Christmas, they'll play Celtic and Rangers 3, 4, 5 times, and Hearts as well, both in the Premier Sports Cup and in the league. And that's when we'll get a good gauge of it. You know, I said last week, I wrote a column in Aberdeen last weekend welcoming the challenge, because I do think that it would do more for Scottish football than summer football or a 16-team league or burning the Blazers at Hampden if we could have a good sustained challenge from an Aberdeen or a Hearts that actually threatens to split up Celtic and Rangers, if not take them on entirely. The problem is that whenever you write that, it tends to fall to bits after September the 30th.
Do you see it's been plausible?
No, I don't. I just think, like, as older I've got and the way football has gone, there's less surprising things. There's less. It's because the whole thing is predicated on money. Mm-hmm. Money. You know, people used to say you can't buy success. You can't do it any other way. Mm-hmm. I mean, your budget. You know, the teams with the biggest budget, you can buy failure. I'm not saying you can go and spend a lot of money on rubbish. But to be a success at the top level, you've got to have money, and you've got to have resources. And I think you can, you know, like for example, you can maybe fall upon a team that you brought 4 from your academy up. It happens like Ajax and Monaco or whatever, who have got tremendous resources to do that. But generally, what happens is that them that's got the money get the more money, and I think it just doesn't apply to the 11. I think what applies to over a season applies to squads. You're seeing more and more now that the squad is what matters at every level of football, whether it's the SPFL or whether it's Champions League. I thought you saw it in the Premier Cup the other week there with Celtic and Falkirk, something that could have been a bit iffy. You just look at
the depth and what you can.
So they can bring on.
But Aberdeen don't have the European factor. This will help.
They don't, but you can see with Ngoy going out. The striker, who are they bringing in? If, for example, if seen the season goes on with Celtic and say something happened to Furuhashi, you could say, well, they could play Ida, and even then they can bring on Maida. I mean, Maida plays striker for Japan. You know, they've got options.
The depth this weekend is interesting though, because you'd have looked at that on paper and thought, well, that's our first big test, maybe is Hearts, but you look where Hearts are, and they'll go up now on the back of a European, like, you know, they're away.
Yeah, I think January is really interesting for Aberdeen, and here's why. Because if you're bringing over Jimmy Tillin, much as with Ange Postecoglou from Japan, you're hoping he has a good grasp of the low-hanging fruit.
Yep.
And the Scandinavian season, Swedish ends in December?
Aye.
So I would really hope, especially with the money that's still got left over from Majowski, hopefully, that Jimmy Tillin will have 3 or 4 Swedish League prospects, classic player trading model players who he will bring in and he will know can do a job for Aberdeen, who will be the kind of guys who your Journos, your Celtics, your Rangers, or your Bolognas will be looking and saying, oh aye, 2 years' time, we'll take him for 4.5, 5, 6, 7 million pounds.
And crucially too, if he continues where he is now, you've got a belief, you've got the belief in the backing of the board because you've already made an impression.
So.
Yeah, absolutely, and again, that's that. I mean, I think Tilly was a really interesting appointment, because at the time, you know, people are throwing up the usual suspect. If you look at him, his CV, you say, well, there's nothing certain. He could come to Aberdeen, it could have been a disaster. For a million reasons, because he's a human being, it's a human, you know, his wife maybe doesn't settle, his family doesn't that, he finds a football, you know, whatever. It just doesn't work. But what you've got to base decisions on is what's the evidence in front of you, and the evidence Teeling was good. You know, he takes teams, he improves them, he's a winner at that level, which is not, some people would say was very similar to the SPFL. So that was, to use Tony Bloom's words, that's a good bet. That's a decent bet. And it's working out for them.
I do reserve the right to come back here in a fortnight and say he's a dud. You know, so that's the nature of the business.
But isn't it football? Because you will see it all your life in football. I mean, I was having the conversation the other day there about Van Dijk. And I can remember, you know, I was a journalist on the ground and going to games every week in Scotland and that. And Van Dijk's now probably hailed as one of the greatest defenders ever. That's what he's, you know, if you see players, you know, top 5 central defenders of all time and all that. I remember people in Scotland saying, this guy will do. He's lazy, can't he'll not make it.
Found out at Champions League level.
He'll get found out at Champions League. Oh, if he goes down to the English Premier League, he's going to get found.
Can I just remind you that Virgil van Dijk played in a 6-goal thrashing for Celtic in the Nou Camp.
So, but that's football. I mean, it's like even if you just look at, for example, here's the classic one, and we can just use it because it's contemporaneous. Kuhn in March and February, what have they done? They bought a dud. Kuhn in July, August and September, my goodness, is the greatest thing. Celtic have pulled in the next thing. coon on Tuesday night back to being a dud. He's the same guy. You know, it's just. I mean, that's there is
It's
nothing.
immediate judgment.
But it's nothing more volatile, and it's more volatile because you can talk about analytics, you can talk about the reputation of managers, you can talk about the strategy of the club, you talk about anything else you want, but it's the score line at the end of 90 minutes.
In that respect, to this month we've got international football. Steve Clarke named his squad for obviously the forthcoming games against Croatia and Portugal. Do you think he'll take some of the shackles off, or do you think he will remain particularly cautious?
I think there's less chance of Steve Clarke changing his approach as a Brendan Rodgers, to be honest. He is what he is. I think this is a critical period for Steve Clarke. I've felt that since the Euros, actually. There was always that danger going into the Euros with one win and what was it? It was 9 or whatever it was at that point, that he would have a poor Euros. There was always that danger. And then you're straight into Pool A of the Nations League, where you have Croatia, Portugal and Poland. And those are dangerous games. And it hasn't started especially well. And now you look at the defensive issues, you know, key players falling out like Jack Hendry and so on. And he's calling in Nicky Devlin, he's calling in Liam Lindsay, 28-year-old who's getting his first cap. That's not to disparage Liam Lindsay at all, but he is going down the list now of candidates. And they're going to Zagreb against Luka Modric and co on October the 12th, and then of course you get a home game against Portugal on the 15th at Hampden. So you could be on, what is the one, what I can't kick you up with the start away, 1 win and 14 or 15.
It's 15.
You know, it's not entirely out of the question that by the end of the polling game in November or what have you, you could be looking at 1 win in 17 or 18. It becomes a very difficult situation. Now, the SFA pretty much have an attitude that the job is Steve Clarke's as long as he wants it, and I think he would like to take them through to the World Cup finals. But approval ratings dip quickly, as we know. There are already a lot of people looking to, I think, pick holes in Steve Clarke, and if you're looking at the results, it's difficult to find much argument with that, really. I think whatever happens, they'll be remembered as a very good Scotland manager, but I do wonder whether November will be a period where people will be looking to take stock and think, has he taken them as far as he can take them?
Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And I think agree with every word. And what's Steve Clarke's strongest ally at the moment is almost the Brendan Rodgers like intransigence of the SFA, who have no willingness or move to sack him for so many reasons. Remember, they'll have the as much as football people can have it, they'll have some semblance of gratitude towards him. But he's also got a deal. He's also got backroom staff, so they've got to write that off, a cash-strapped organisation, and then go out and find somebody of the calibre and the willingness to take on what is a hugely challenging job
in the middle of a campaign.
In the middle of a campaign where you're going down the cludgy, as we used to say. And the thing about it is, and it's old. It's all these jobs. It's the whole dynamic. People say, "Oh, they'll find it difficult." Somebody, of course they won't. There'll be a queue right round the block to be head coach of Scotland. It'll be huge queue.
Neville Scowl will be in there again.
But who's in the queue? That's the problem.
Absolutely.
And it's like everything else. One thing I think Clarke had a catastrophic Euros. I really did, for his reputation, for the team. I just think I was there, as you know, Alison, and it was horrific. It was just an awful campaign, devoid of hope, devoid of passion, devoid of any kind of energy or ambition. But that doesn't mean I don't think he's a good guy. He's an absolute.
No, I know, but Hugh, I do think, Alison, you get to a point with all Scotland managers where you can't quite see the tipping point, but in hindsight, you look back and you know what it was. You look at 4-6-0 for Levine in Prague. You look at Alex Miklic, what happened in Kazakhstan. You look at Gordon Strachan, where the 2-2 in Slovenia, and he started talking about genetics and what have you. There's always a tipping point where in hindsight you think there was no way back from that. And I think Hungary was that for Steve Clarke.
I think it was as well, but I think because of the politics of the situation and the personalities around it, and the SFA having no impetus,
I don't know about that, Hugh. I don't know about that. I mean, Mike Mulroney appointed Steve Clarke, it was his man. Does feel that the job should be his as long as he wants to, but he's a pragmatist. He's a pragmatist. And the SFA have to be pragmatic. They have to sell tickets. The end of the Nations League could be a natural point for it. I think, listen, I remember thinking actually after the last performance here, where, they weren't playing so badly that maybe he'd done enough to kind of limp on a bit longer. And that is very much the case. But when you look at the slightly weakened, diminished squad that's going to be going to Croatia and playing Portugal, these are dangerous times.
Yeah, you don't see much cause for optimism. Anyway, that's all we've got time for. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching, and thank you to my guests, Stephen, and to Hugh.